Why didn't you just hit the button
I
again?
did. I hit the button several times.
All I did is I walked out here and hit the button again.
You were right, Super Skylake. I should have listened to you.
It was just hitting the button again? Wow.
Just hitting the button again. Apparently, I needed to hit it like 5 times instead of 4.
Sometimes you just have to kick it again.
Well, you had to hit it an odd number of times. I think you were just hitting it too quickly the second time. Maybe.
Maybe.
That's all I know.
Reverse the polarity. Oh, God. Do you have any idea how accurate that statement is for this microphone?
It was, yeah, totally. Because I bought a power cable for it. And it turns out the microphone is opposite the polarity. So it actually has the neutral on the inside and the power on the outside, which is opposite for most power supplies. So I literally, like, it's working because I cut the wire and, like, swapped the cords and then twisted it back together. So we literally had to reverse the polarity on this microphone.
Good that you can at least do that, though. I probably would have just given up immediately.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, how you discovered Wheel of Time, and where you are, what you're doing, and then pimp your book a little bit.
So, I'm Alex London, though when I write, I go by Alex R. London, because there's already an author named Alex London, which is not very useful for me. And I have lived in Texas all my life, just because I was born here and never moved anywhere else with my family. I really got into Wheel of Time because my mom loved the series, and she had all the books at our house. And I finished Game of Thrones a few years ago, and after I finished that, I was just really looking for another big fantasy series to start, and my mom recommended that I start Wheel of Time, and went through the series decently quick. Took a break when I first went off to college, but pretty much became my favorite series I've ever read.
How did your mom discover the series? Any idea where she first encountered it?
I think possibly my granddad bought one of the books when they first came out and gave it to her.
Nice.
I know both of them have read it, and they were the only two in my family who had read it. Now my brother is reading it currently. He's on book 5. He's just started The Fires of Heaven.
Oh, see. Now I'm very envious of that first time journey through.
I have only actually read the series one time.
And yet you have remarkable insight on it, which I've found amazing.
I've kind of been using the podcast as like a second read through, just, going along, learning new things about it, all the different Aes Sedai names.
I mean, isn't that that's what I love about the podcast, is it is sort of the reread. It can be the substitute. It can be the companion for the reread, as I say.
It's definitely taught me a lot of things that I either didn't know or had known but already forgotten about the earlier parts of the book.
I tell you what, I did a trivia thing for the first 3 books the other day, and I was like, wow, I don't remember that. I'm like, dude, I did a podcast on it. I've been studying it for years, but still, there's so many details, there's no way to keep them all in your head.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's certain, series, I felt for a long time, I was like, I'm really good at Game of Thrones trivia, but I just know there are people out there who just decimate me with how much they, intensely study the series. My own books are the only ones I could win.
So you've obviously gotten into writing.
I've always kind of had an interest in it. Even when I was growing up, I'd just write little silly things with my parents and for my friends. But really in 7th grade, I did a history paper, and that turned into a full 100-page written kind of historical fantasy thing. And I wrote 3 of them, and it was a little trilogy, and it's just the worst thing imaginable. I looked at it, I had a serious issue with people would be stabbed in the stomach and survive it, and you could, but this happened commonly, and that shouldn't be happening commonly in a story. Then it was really just, I read a lot of fantasy, and fantasy is just kind of what I love, so I really wrote my first book, the first one of the series I'm currently doing, the Armenian Journals. I wrote The Stranger's Orphan in my junior year of high school. I released it self-published in 2017 with my senior year. And then I've been working on that ever since. I published The Desert Sun, the second book, earlier this year. It's twice as long. And then now I'm 100 pages into writing the third one, The Winter's Dance, this year.
Is it getting easier to go as you go along? Are you learning more about the writing process? Or is it something that, it's still just as hard to write?
It's
the third book as the first.
Different aspects are easier versus different aspects being harder. Like, when I first started out with The Stranger's Orphan, I was a lot worse at writing. So, like, I mean, you've possibly read parts of it, and
I did, yes.
there were a lot of, less now, because I've kind of gone back through and edited it slowly, and there were a lot of grammatical errors that now I don't make when I write.
Sure.
And since I'm doing it self-published, I don't really have any, like, editors.
Well, no professional editors?
Yeah, my family helps me edit it. My brother always takes through the first pass, and it's just really nice of them, and it really helps me out, but we're not a professional editing team, so you have errors in there that I just can't undo.
Right.
But like my second book that I just did, I think is a lot smoother in the actual writing than the first one was. And same for the third is now better than that, in my opinion.
Well, and you know, what I've really seen is authors who write get better, you know, and that's, as Henderson said, his first 10 books he pretty much threw away, but he wrote them, you know, and it's amazing to me to step up and continue to write and do that, even though there's these amazing fantasy novels, and to realize that, like, you can't always be the best on your first novel out, but you can get so much better and take on the best.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I guess I'm sort of stumbling there a little bit.
I mean, Robert Jordan's Warrior of the Altai that just came out, it's kind of an example. Right. He didn't ever publish it because he didn't think it was, or possibly because he didn't think it was up to the standard he was looking for. Whereas then he made The Wheel of Time, which obviously all of us adore, so...
No, I'm not really sure that's up to my standards either. I'll tell you what, I think it's...
I will say that as I've written, reading other books, which, like, objectively are better than my own, like Wheel of Time and stuff, sometimes it's weird reading other people's writing, because if they don't, like, phrase things the same way I would, or do the same, like, grammatical structure, sometimes it catches me off guard.
Sure.
Even though, like, mine's not necessarily right, or shouldn't be doing that, it's just a little bit odd spending so much time with how I write, then go into a different way.
You know, the more starting a sport, playing a sport, and then watching it, you see it in a whole different way than just watching it as a pure spectator, or, you know, just reading a book as a pure reader, as opposed to someone who's written books. I'm sure it completely changes how you see the writing process and the words on the page. And
that's kind of why I, like, self-published in the first place was, well, because I wrote the first one, and I knew, like, back then, even though I was a lot more confident in it than I probably should have been. I mean, I'm proud of what it is, and I like my story.
Yeah. Absolutely. It was. I unfortunately I didn't get a chance to read as much of it as I wanted to, but it was very engaging, and I still have it sitting here, and I keep wanting to open back up to it. But
yeah, your shout out you did was just a really nice surprise that night when I actually heard it. That made my day that day.
Well, you know, I mean, you deserved it. Like, the work you've been putting in and the quality. You know, it's to say I've been really impressed with the amount of work you put into the books, and also the amount of community you've brought to the Raven Writing Prompt channel on Discord. So both of those things make me really happy to have you on for Chapter 18, A Taste of Solitude. And the symbol is the rising sun of Cairhien. Did you like that little segue?
That was pretty smooth.
I don't know if you're looking at a copy of the book or not, but there's also a map of Cairhien.
There
is on the page before that. I forgot to flip back to that. That's right.
Which I thought was a little interesting, because the previous chapter was already in Cairhien, but I guess because he just arrived, so they didn't put it before the chapter since he wasn't there.
I guess, yeah, not tipping him off or anything like that.
Because the previous chapter ends with him sentencing Mangan to hanging, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It does.
Just listened to that yesterday.
And the map of Cairhien is always, it's such a square box. They do not like curved
pretty
lines.
uninteresting to look at.
It's very uninteresting to look at.
This is good. It's so neat. It's so orderly. I would know exactly how to get around to this city.
Oh, you like but the thing is, it's not even a grid pattern. There's like...
It's kind of a mess.
Weird oblong rectangles. It doesn't seem like it's even that easy to get around, to be perfectly honest.
In the map, it looks that way, but the description of Cairhien in some chapter somewhere does say that even the alleyways make a grid in Cairhien.
Mm.
So the map is a slightly anti-canonical illustration of the city.
Except it's in the book.
I'm looking at the top right of the map, though, and it just looks like a complete mess. Like, those are barely shapes.
Those are barely shapes. I wonder if that's where the some of the wealthier manors and stuff are at.
Larger houses there. They were like, we can do whatever the heck we want with our land.
Yeah, they have weird shaped lots and gardens and whatnot.
So what does A Taste of Solitude mean? I'll be honest, I am not sure what they're referencing with that title.
Rand mentions it at some point in the chapter, I believe.
Yeah, I think that he is just wishing for a taste of solitude, I think is the theme of this chapter. He's got Lews Therin in his head. He can't get rid of the maidens in the Aiel following him everywhere that he goes. He's got the Tyrans and the Cairhien and nobles hounding him at every turn. Berelain always needs him to chime in on something. Ruark always wants his ear for something else. So he's like, God, to just be alone in my own head for 5 minutes.
Yeah, after all the abuses that he suffered in the beginning parts of the book from Alana, and then now he's kind of feeling a bit betrayed by Berelain and Ruark by them intentionally leaving him to hang a friend. And he just kind of wants to get away from it all.
Yeah, I think we talked in the last chapter about just how many blow after blow after blow he'd been facing between Alana and then Mangan and then just everything else. He wants to get away.
It really is just a punishing storyline for Rand in Book 6 of the Wheel of Time.
Absolutely. Yeah, leading up to Dumai's Wells, which is, a nice relaxing vacation.
There's a very short paragraph on the second page of the chapter. Almost alone. He could feel Alana still, and Lews Therin moaned in the far distance over his dead Ileana. He could never be entirely alone, maybe never again, but what he had of solitude felt good, though, after so long.
Yeah, I think that's where I decided the chapter title was derived from, I believe.
So what we're seeing is just like basically the screws come down on Rand.
Mm-hmm.
I think I actually chose to do this chapter, or I asked to do this chapter because of the title, just because I thought it was relatable since, quarantine has stuck us all, giving us a little bit of taste of solitude.
Oh, maybe a little too much taste of solitude. We're looking at this like, why do you want that much
I
solitude?
think it's been 2 weeks since I spoke to a person in face-to-face.
All I can taste is solitude anymore. I would like some spice of something. Anything.
Really? Because I thought that was smoke we were tasting.
Yeah, it's not the
Smoke,
type of
solitude.
spice I
Is there a
want.
difference anymore? The fact that you literally can taste the smoke in the air here is pretty bad.
It's been rough. Yeah. We asked, like, what's causing the cough? The COVID? The smoke? Or are you just getting high? Yeah, pick your poison here in Portland. Or the tear gas.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many things to make you cough. You never know.
Yeah, down here it's pretty much just COVID right now. We keep getting a bunch of cases on campus.
Oh,
Yay.
what campus are you on?
UT Dallas.
Mm.
Just a small subset of UT Austin. Just decently sized.
What's being in college like these days?
Mostly boring. I mean,
Okay.
I only really have one close friend at the school. And yeah, most of my friends go to other places because still pretty much just talk to the people from my high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I live alone in my apartment and I just kind of sit around reading books and watching TV shows. I just binge watched the entirety of Attack on Titan.
Oh yeah, that was fun. That was a fun little show.
Thought that was really good. And then I started the Broken Earth trilogy this last week. So that's been fun.
Definitely a good way to spend your time. As I'll always recommend that. So like, what are classes like? Are they all online?
All of my classes are online right now, and
Okay.
all pretty repetitive because most business classes seem to just tell me the same thing over and over again.
Supply and demand.
I'm not so passionate about my school. I'm definitely more interested in my own writing than I am with my degree.
It's funny how that can come back.
Yeah.
Did you mention what you were studying? Did I miss that?
No, I didn't. I'm a human resources management major.
Oh, cool.
I didn't have a good reason for choosing it. It just seemed like a stable job instead of, trying to pursue writing itself just on its own.
HR is always going to be necessary, and if you can get your foot in that door, it's super stable, and it's fairly secure, and it pays well.
Yeah, that's what I kind of was going with when I signed up for it. Mostly don't have any regrets. It's all right.
Oh man, human resources. Is that what Berelain's basically doing right now?
Pretty much.
Terrible.
She's much better at
Yeah.
it than I am.
It's true. The Aiel do respect her for
She's
it.
got a lot more charm.
So Rand's in Cairhien. He's hanging out. I don't have a lot until he actually gets to the school. There's a lot of sort of description and Rand worship, but this is actually a pretty sparse chapter until he actually does go to what essentially is a grad school.
I had a line early on, I think. The line that was, if it hurts too much, make it hurt someone else. I believe that's before he gets there. Yeah, it's just the very first paragraph.
Yeah, that's a Lewis Theron quote, definitely.
Yeah, and I just thought that was a really interesting quote for Rand himself, because it's kind of what, to me, he does with the trying to become Steel and then cuendillar later in life. I mean, he's trying to disassociate himself so that the man who feels pain isn't himself. It's a different part of him. So I thought that quote alone was a interesting way to start off in Rand's POV.
Definitely. Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I think that's why he's inventing Lewis Theron. It hurts too much, so he makes it hurt the voice in his head. This man he invents is the one who takes a lot of the pain. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it definitely adds to that theory that he uses the pseudo-identity of Lewis Theron, that voice in his head, as a target for the upset and the anger and the pain and everything else.
That's a theory that I definitely didn't think about as much until I started listening to the podcast itself, because I was more on the side of Lewis Theron being a separate entity than just a manifestation of madness. I mean, like, I kind of already agreed, but part of me liked the idea that when Lewis Theron himself started going mad when he was alive, there was like a connection between them, so he could hear... for a while I had a weird idea that he could hear Rand when he was going mad, and Rand could hear him when he's going mad, and they were kind of actually discussing... that was my original headcanon when I was reading the series the first time.
Yeah, the communication across time theory, that there's this... Yeah, I always liked that one a lot, and... it
doesn't really work.
The idea of it appealed to me, but yeah, I agree. Like, it just fell apart, man.
Yeah.
It's just, there's so much evidence against it.
Also, yeah, the biggest thing against it being that, like, Lewis Theron didn't live very long after going mad. Like, he went mad immediately after sealing the Dark One because he got hit with that lash so hard. He pretty much, like, went home after sealing the boar, killed his family, got confronted by a Shamael, and then made Dragonmount.
Pretty casual day.
Yeah, as far as we know, all that pretty much happened within, like, 1 or 2 days. Like, it wasn't like the rotting bodies of his family or anything like that.
No, yeah.
Although I do wonder, maybe he destroyed a bunch of other stuff before he went after his family. That's possible, but, not 2 years worth of conversations with somebody else.
And they don't ever really have, like, solid enough conversations that you could really say it's actually two full discussion between two different identities. They only ever exchange, like, a sentence, and then he just goes off rambling again.
And he always seems to react to things that are happening in Rand space, not things that are happening back in the Age of Legends or anything like that.
The exception, kind of Ilyena.
Yeah, well, yeah, the constant wailing about Ilyena. But I feel like Rand has just internalized that memory, and because of the way that he internalizes the death of every woman and every maiden around him, and he has that litany going in his head constantly. And because that memory has leaked over and he feels like, that was him in a previous life, he deserves that one as well. The only thing that the theory doesn't really cover for me is the transference of those memories, because he undeniably gets Lewis Theron's memories when it comes to certain weaves and certain knowledge, like how to break the shield.
Details about the Forsaken before they actually ever meet him.
Exactly, yeah. The plum trees, climbing the plum trees as a kid.
Yeah, there are definitely aspects of his memories from Lewis Theron that Rand himself could not have just learned by reading or hearing it from other people.
He goes to the school, and the school is, as far as I can tell, more like a grad school. It's got professors doing research, and some people come to learn, but mostly they're there to help with the research. Mm-hmm. So I sort of think of this as the founding of grad school. As opposed to trade school, which is what all the people have been in before, is like, yes, specific knowledge on how to do one very specific thing. Whereas this is more just a gathering of general knowledge. Mm-hmm. And then, so there's a bunch of inventions that he encounters, which are a lot of fun to talk about. And, really fun to talk about, like, how they're going to influence the future of Randland once they actually get going.
Yeah, the amount of theories.
That he's so dismissive of airplanes. He just
the idea
really doesn't like the idea. It's not until a lot later when back towards the end when they start dealing with using the gateways to spy on the armies by creating a circle in the ground and then looking down through it. whenever that starts to happen, they start to kind of wonder about using them to somehow create a system to fly in a way, I believe.
Yeah, one of the Greys theorizes that potentially gateways in the sky might be the secret to flying.
Yeah.
But she has no idea how. She's just like, here's this abstract connection that I've made. This is interesting.
That feels a lot more dangerous than an airplane. Which I guess it's something they know, though, so that makes it easier.
Oh yeah, Yukiri. I thought that's who it
Yukiri.
was, but I didn't want to say Yukiri and then be absolutely wrong, so I chose to just say one of the Greys.
Yeah, with most of the Aes Sedai names, I recognize them when I see them, but I can't pull. I can pull out a decent number of them, but not the smaller.
Oh yeah, after a single read, that's like I'm impressed you can pull out any of them. Oh.
Yeah, my first couple of reads, especially when we start to get into like the hunt for the Black Aja, that Elida thing starts, and that Aes Sedai word salad with Saren and Ciane and like a whole bunch of them that all have very similar names, and it just becomes Aes Sedai soup very quickly.
When you're like, is this the same person? Siren and Saren? Like,
Yeah.
Are you actually just using an alias, but really bad at it? So you just chose to rearrange your letters?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Pavara is like the only one of that group that I could name.
Yeah, I definitely remember those names more than any of the others, but distinguishing them from one another is a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, especially because they're almost always together and doing the same things.
Especially Saren and Ciane. Because especially reading, those two names next to each other look very similar.
Yeah, they do.
So some of the inventions,
Yeah, let's go over them. We've got the invention of a better printing press.
which we know that they've been using printing presses in Randland before this. Like, the printing press isn't itself a new invention.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they have, books are pretty readily available.
Right. So I'm curious what makes this a better printing press.
Is it speed? I thought, from my understanding, it printed faster. Great hulking shape of levers and huge flat plates as a printing press.
Yeah, I imagine it's probably faster. Maybe it can do more pages at once. Like, you can maybe do multiple plates and roll them, and it will do, like, 5 pages in a row kind of a thing, rather than, like, just one page over and over and over again. It'll do 5 pages over and over and over again. Who knows? I'm sure that I could do some research on the evolution of the printing press and give you an answer to that question, but I'm not gonna.
Too used to actual mechanical printers nowadays. Don't know much about the original printing presses.
Right. And I know, like, the original printing press is, like, I thought the Gutenberg, with movable type was pretty much...
Also comes immediately after already discussing a better version of paper where they can create finer paper than before.
Right.
Possibly
which
you
goes
could
really
use
well.
that with your printing press.
So I'm wondering if maybe they're talking about the linotype machine. And the linotype machine is a little different from the printing press, where it basically has a keyboard. And when you type the key, it drops an item, and then it creates basically a basin of molten lead and casts the whole page as a thing. But it's anyway, a linotype. It doesn't sound like a linotype, which is the only sort of evolution above the Gutenberg that I think they could be talking about.
Could be an evolution of the printing press that we didn't experience in our world, technically. If you just wanted to pretend that it's a completely different version of the printing press.
Yeah, it could just be building a better, just a version of it that works a little better. Doesn't have to be.
Yeah,
But that's what I was wondering, is like, what makes a better printing press? Because, like, a printing press is a printing press, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, speed, just a general
really
efficiency.
Just imagine speed and general efficiency, exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then we've got another 2 inventions that pair really well together. We have new roads and the invention of steam power. So there's one guy here who has an idea of how to basically, carry water to new drains. A tabletop exhibit with tiny figures of men in carts, cranes, and rollers meant to show how roads could be built and paved as well as they had in years long past. Which, that those old Roman roads that have like 16 layers to them and still are around today. I imagine they're doing something like that.
Just like beautifully paved cobblestone that will last until the destruction of the sun.
Right, right. Maybe even with like concrete and asphalt.
Yeah, potentially. Though I hate asphalt roads.
They are nice and smooth, though.
For like 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Someone drops a rock on it.
And it's all just over. You have to start completely over again.
Well, in fairness, they're not dealing with 18-wheelers driving across the concrete roads.
True. Just got a bunch of horses.
I wonder if the 18-wheeler with like smooth rubber tires is harder on the road than like wagon wheels that are lined in iron and iron-shod horses.
I think the sheer weight of trucks does a number on roads. Like, it really does. It's so much more weight than a car that, you know, you see even just freeways that have trucks driving on them, they crumble much, much faster.
That's true.
Yeah, the asphalt's more likely to buckle under the weight of something like an 18-wheeler than it is just a horse with a cart attached to it.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. Because the Horton cars are going to limit your space. Now, of course, they are getting the steam engine, so maybe... Of course, I think they're probably going to get trains before they get steam-based cars.
Right. Which, you know, we see in our age as well. We have the Horton cars.
The Horton cars. Horton cars. The hearse, what?
So, and I think that by the last battle, there actually is an operational steam engine.
I think there is.
Yeah, they're using it to transport supplies in Camelin.
Yeah.
Although I think they're using mostly gateways, so it's like a gateway plus a steam engine to transport a bunch of stuff.
Because they still haven't managed to find a way to get the steam engine to go more than like 50 miles without completely destroying itself.
Right.
It's a lot less efficient currently than just making a hole in the air and magically walking through it.
Yeah.
Right. If you got an engine to actually pull it. But yeah, I mean, again, he's just developing the idea, and we're 6 months away, you know, a year away from the last battle at the most. So,
which,
you know,
it's these kinds of inventions on top of the like newfound vigor of experimenting with the capabilities of the One Power that make me feel like the Fourth Age is going to be the Wheel of Time equivalent of steampunk.
Right. Yeah. I always like that idea that Fourth Age steampunk, where you've got all sorts of weird like mechanical devices, but you can reinforce them with the One Power. You can have like cuendillar parts.
Yeah, just magic items that are powered part by magic and part by like fuel of some sort, be that steam or coal or whatever, you know,
sort of ter'angreal trains.
Yeah,
right.
Even if the magic is just used to increase like the durability of the machines themselves, go a long way to creating a more durable type of society with their steampunk.
Sure, can you just imagine having like cuendillar piston heads in your engine? Nothing else different, just cuendillar piston heads. Like,
never have to take your car into the shop anymore.
No, never. And you could probably fuel it with, you know, all sorts of explosions and not worrying about.
Could you imagine a cuendillar timing chain? Oh boy.
Yep.
Oh boy. Also, because cuendillar is like so light, could you imagine if you just... Engines are normally iron anyways. Could you imagine just like making that all cuendillar instead?
Right, and you could use like super thin material because it wouldn't matter how thick it was.
Right.
Like, yeah, absolutely. No, the idea of basically having an infinite unbreakable material that you can use in construction makes engineers just drool. Like, if you could take any part and just put a hard limit and be like, okay, no matter what, this won't break.
Does make things a lot easier, and it's kind of it's almost unfair in their world. Like, they have this unlimited, unbreakable resource that if they actually learn how to use it efficiently, could just make their society so much better than even ours is currently, because we don't have those sorts of just indestructible things that they can make with the One Power.
It raises the question of why did we never see armor made from overlapping plates of cuendillar? Why did we never see swords made of cuendillar? Why did we never see cuendillar battle implements?
Mostly it's because they don't know how to do that, right?
But they did in the Age of Legends, and they had power wrought swords. So instead of making the sword power wrought and unbreakable, why didn't they just make it into cuendillar?
That's a good point.
No,
possibly because they're dumb. That applies to a lot of decisions. A lot of decisions in these books can be just because they were a bit stupid.
I do know that the talent for making cuendillar was rare even in the Age of Legends. Moghedien does say that. I think it was also more common among men than it was among women, being that it is a talent of Earth. And then, even in the Age of Legends, they weren't pumping out vast amounts of cuendillar. Like, cuendillar was still relatively precious, even in the Age of Legends, when people knew how to make it.
Is the only one of the, I guess female channelers, not Aes Sedai at this point, that we really follow in the series who has a proficiency with Earth, Egwene. She's the only one that comes to mind.
She's the only one that we follow to any real degree. There are a couple of the novices and accepted that are learning how to make cuendillar once she discovers it that show proficiency in Earth, but haven't really met that potential yet.
And I'd be willing to bet one or two of the nameless Aes Sedai technically have, like, I feel like we've heard about one other Aes Sedai who has Earth talent, but I couldn't pull it up if you put a gun to my head.
Yeah, Lyanna had a certain amount of proficiency with Earth that made her relatively quick at creating cuendillar. She was still nowhere near Egwene. The only reason that she got about the same amount of chain done as Egwene is because she was smart enough to mask her ability to channel and invert her weaves, which Egwene didn't do because she's dumb sometimes.
It's right before she gets herself captured, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
We've also got a telescope, so it looks like they're going to be looking at stars in the future and maybe discovering their place in the universe. Maybe, hey, if you can make a gateway to anywhere you can see, telescopes could come in handy.
I appreciated Rand's purposeful annoyance of the woman who is guiding him by saying that he's going to fund the telescopes that she doesn't view as useful. And he's just intentionally annoying somebody because he prefers the designer of the telescopes than he does the other people. One of my favorite aspects of the descriptions of the machinery that he sees was all the quotes where it says that, like, so they say, or according to its maker. Because I enjoyed how it shows the just skepticism that Rand has, even though he's the one supporting these things and trying to get them made. It really shows, like, his origins are still just from the Two Rivers, where they didn't really consider this sort of thing. And he's just now growing into a place where he's world-weary and has traveled enough that he actually thinks about the broader picture for a society like this.
Well, and farming, I mean, man, farming didn't change in our world for hundreds of thousands of years, or maybe not hundreds, tens of thousands of years. You know, farmers aren't, when it works, you don't necessarily need to innovate, right?
Yeah. And then immediately that is one of the ones that he takes a interest in, is the plow that he sees is possibly be handy for feeding Cairhien, because the farming equipment is what he knows, and it's how he knows to immediately apply it to things that are applicable to his knowledge. Overall, just the schools I've always seen as a subtle but important aspect of showing Rand's competence as a leader beyond all the parts where he messes up in the story or gets bogged down in all the politics. This is one thing that really just sets him apart from most of the other leadership roles in the story.
It's an example of him really trying to do the right thing, which is not something you see a lot of leaders doing, is like trying to preserve knowledge for the future. Nothing, and like actually having long-term goals as opposed to just short-term, like, problems that, you know, a lot of politicians, they're just looking for the next quarter, the next election, the next big, you know, line or speech or donation or whatever. He's really making long-term plans. In a lot of ways, it's because he's like, well, he's never going for re-election. You know?
That's what I was thinking. Like, a lot of leaders, by the time that their term is ending, they try and actually do something to leave a mark on the world. And Rand plans on dying. So he plans on leaving his mark on the world by making it better in some small way. Or a big way if he can.
Yeah, you have to wonder if maybe the fact that he assumes he's dying doesn't make him a better leader. Because, like, if he assumed he'd be around afterwards, then maybe he'd be, like, acting differently and, like, trying to preserve his power for after the battle.
He might try and put off the smaller things, like, in his eyes, the school, until he could just set up these types of things after he's already lived. Whereas since he believes he's going to die, he's got to do it in the present and not put it off for tomorrow.
Yeah, I really think that Rand, with his death syndrome, his just utter belief that he has to die, does a lot of reckless things. He makes a lot of reckless decisions that are effective for the short term, but have some long-term ramifications that he's like, fuck it, I don't have to deal with it, I need a fix now, kind of a thing.
Just kind of interesting, because on the other hand, you have the exact opposite later on with Elaine and her thinking that she's invincible, so she's only planning in the long term, or in the short term.
She definitely plays the long game. Yeah, she plays the long game a lot more, especially because not only does she have that foolish, naive, young, indestructible complex, but she also has one of the highest life expectancies because of her strength in the One Power, and she knows it.
During that time, though, she gets quite a few other people killed by believing that she's invincible whereas Rand gets people killed because he believes he's going to die. They both kind of create the same issues, even though they have the exact opposite outlook on their lives.
I also think that Elaine is a little more reckless with other people's lives than Rand is. Like, every death that Rand can lay at his own feet tears him to pieces, whereas Elaine is just like, people make sacrifices for their queen.
Which is partially just how they were raised. I mean, she has been raised to believe that she can, even though she's raised to believe that she should look out for the people, she's still royalty who sees herself as not better than everybody else, but in a position where her life has a greater impact on the rest of the country. Whereas Rand was raised to not think he had much of an impact on Andor at all, which they didn't even know they were a part of, and let alone the world. So when he's stuck into this role, it's much harder for him to see that he doesn't need to care about every single one of the little people.
Yeah, I can see that too. Another one of the inventions that comes up is aqueducts. Wooden models of viaducts to carry water from places where the wells were going dry, of new drains and sewers for Cairhien, and even a tabletop exhibit with, and then the roads and stuff that we talked about already. But just the evolution of infrastructure is beginning in this palace, in this college. You could even say the birth of modern engineering, or the rebirth of modern engineering is beginning. It's kind of interesting to think of Randland covered in aqueducts. Could you imagine aqueducts going into the waste?
Coming from Ruidian? Yeah, what can I say? It's Infrastructure Week. Yeah, so the next one we get to is the Herid Fel, which is just one of my favorite philosophy interactions, and I'm really sad that we don't get another good scene talking to Herid Fel, because there's so many questions he brings up that are so interesting about the pattern, and this conversation alone gets referenced so much when talking about the wheel and how it works. I don't think he gets everything right, but still, it's a pretty remarkable conversation. And one of the things I like about Herid Fel is just, he can't remember that Rand's the Dragon Reborn. There's, a point where he's like, well, I mean, there's nothing you or I could do about it. And Rand's like, yeah, except there is something I can do about it.
Literally something I have to do about it.
Yeah, so, except it is my responsibility, sorry.
But that's why he loves talking to Herid Fel so much, and such an important person for Rand to be able to interact with, because kind of the taste of solitude. And earlier he had a line in the chapter where he said that he was torn between the impatience and the pleasure of not being the focus of every eye. And he's so used to everyone looking to him and waiting for him to do something, whereas Herid Fel just does not care who Rand is. And that's just a really pleasant feeling for him to experience every once in a while. That it's very distinct.
Just in passing, I think it's funny that Rand's Aiel guards are totally hitting on each other.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have really even noticed if he hadn't pointed it out. Just their interactions alone.
They're two totally dumb kids that have feelings for each other and don't know how to express it, stomping on each other's feet, checking each other out, doing all kinds of dumb stuff. Ignoring each other and then checking each other out when the other person isn't looking.
Jelani, right?
Jelani and Dedrick.
Yeah.
Where do you think they end up together?
Do we know anything about what happens to them? I didn't recognize either of their names beyond this chapter.
I don't know. I want to say that maybe one of them dies somewhere along the line.
I'm afraid I didn't do my research well and actually look their names up ahead of time.
I looked up a few people, but not them. I liked right before he got to Herid Fel's study the line that then he was able to slip off with Jelani and Dedrick and Luz Theron and Alana, just re-emphasizing the ever-present nature of how many people he has to deal with. Yeah, taste of solitude that's not really alone.
Oh, yeah, Jelani's young. She was born in 983, so she's only 17.
Is she currently young, or was she young? Is she dead now?
I mean, she's not even alive now, different age. But unknown sept, unknown clan, Fardaris Mai. Current status is alive, so she doesn't die in the series that we see.
Yeah, it says on Dedrick, however you want to say that, it says that he's also alive. So they could just live happily ever after together.
I think we're going to go with that.
Yep, head-canon, Jelani and Dedrick get
just
married after the last battle.
Sweet little background romance.
They've seen enough of fighting and dying by the spear. Jelani makes a bridal wreath.
So the important, I think, things that Herid Fel starts talking about, is really the idea of the wheel. Is sort of the idea that the wheel turns, and what has already happened has to happen in the future, and that sort of all of his conclusions come from that idea that that everything has to be sealed back up again. The Dark One has to be forgotten about. Like, all of that has to go around as long as the Dark One doesn't win.
Yeah, that speech that he gives to Rand kind of encapsulates a lot of the ideas behind the whole series itself, with the wheel turning and everything repeating endlessly, pretty much. And from what I can tell, he's mostly correct that they do have to seal the Dark One back up, and then later it will turn and somebody will let him out again. So I was wondering, like, what fallacies in his statement do you guys find versus...
So I'm wondering about his thought with, do you think it was made whole, or do you think it was made with the boar already bored into it the first time?
I think it was whole at one point. Mm-hmm.
And and then the other thing is, Rand appears to make it whole in the last battle.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something he's remaking something the creator made flawlessly, and that appears to be something Herid Fel kind of dismisses out of hand. And I was curious what you thought about that. Is that just Herid Fel being wrong and not understanding that Rand can use all three powers to weave together something like new? Or is that sort of a reference to maybe Rand is the creator? Maybe he is the only one who can weave those things together.
I feel like that's more just Herid Fel not being aware of the possibilities that Rand himself possesses, because at this point, none of them even know about the true power, do they? Aside from the Forsaken.
Rand probably knows of it because of his battles with the Forsaken.
And also with Asmodean. Like, Asmodean's talked about how addictive it is, and I think...
But without that, would he have been able to fully seal the boar itself? Because Herid Fel would not know about the true power.
Sure. Well, I think, this is my assumption, is that he would have actually been able to seal the boar, but without the true power to protect Saidin and Saidar, both of them would have been tainted in the backlash. It was the important thing of the true power was keeping them from being tainted. I think the seal was entirely possible.
Let's look at it the way that it's kind of put together, because we know that the creator sealed the Dark One away, and the creator, the one power kind of comes from the creator, you could say. So the male half and the female half come from the creator. It would stand to reason that the creator could manipulate both, and probably used both in the creation of the world and the Wheel of Time and everything else that came from that. And then the Dark One has their own power, and the creator used the one power to imprison, encapsulate, separate from the rest of the worlds the Dark One. And Rand pretty much recreated that. He used the same power that the creator used to seal the Dark One away, And the reason that it was so imperfect when Lews Therin did it was because he didn't have access to both halves of the creator's power. He only had access to the male half, and it was really crudely done because they couldn't link without women either. So that, on top of using the Dark One's own power to buffer the one power from the Dark One's touch, was a stroke of genius.
Yeah, I agree. And with your point that Rand essentially just uses the power of the creator, and when Seth, you had mentioned I know there's the theory that Rand could be the creator or a reincarnation of it. And kind of as amusing as that is, I just always, more of a emissary, or like kind of how Moradin is to the Dark One, Rand is to the creator.
A champion of, rather than a...
Though then there's the argument that they're the same person, so they could be the champion of the same guy, or entity, not guy. I definitely thought his speech as a whole was just presented a lot of the ideas that Rand goes forward through the rest of the series with. Mm-hmm. And he uses these to pretty much base the foundations of most of his plans.
I think it's also really important here that he says that he doesn't think the bond between Warder and Aes Sedai can be broken, which I think is one of the reasons that Rand never really pursues that line of trying to break it, even though if he'd actually asked an Aes Sedai, they could have told him that, the Aes Sedai can break it if they want.
Yeah, I didn't highlight it because I didn't want to mess up my book. This is the first time I've opened this copy of the book.
Oh, wow.
I've been slowly collecting them for my birthdays and Christmas, and I'm up to Winter's Heart on the hardbacks with the original, the really poorly drawn covers that have pretty backgrounds but bad people.
Daryl K. Sweet.
So I've been collecting those, so it's going well. I mentioned that part in my notes that I took for this, and I thought it was really interesting that he states that the water bond can't be broken, because we obviously know that's not true. Alana does it in the last battle, and Morel does it with...
She releases the bond.
Yeah,
but it can't be broken without the actual bond holder releasing it.
That's what what I was thinking, though, is we know that the water bond can be undone by the one who created it, because she can release Rand, but why can't the person who is bonded to the warder, or the warder, the one who's bonded to the Aes Sedai, why do they not have any kind of control over that bond themselves? Because it kind of ends up being like the Damani collar, where they cannot take it off, but the other person can.
You know, we establish a difference between the one power and its effects. So it's in the same way that you can start a fire with the one power, but the fire itself is a real thing. I think the same thing is true about the bond. It's something that you can create with the one power, but like the bond itself doesn't really involve the one power. You know, it doesn't matter if they're stilled. It doesn't matter, you know, and so that's why a male channeler can't cut the weaves once they're established. You can't break that bond because the bond isn't a thing of the one power anymore. It's a thing that just exists independently of the one power.
So then how does Alana disperse it at the end? Does she just will it away? She doesn't have to use the one power to undo it or anything?
Yeah, I mean, she says she releases it. She doesn't necessarily say that she doesn't seem to embrace the one power. She doesn't, channel anything. She just releases it. She lets go of that bond.
We never see a very specific description of how a warder is released from their bond. We don't get the mechanic of that. It didn't look like, and yeah, I don't think that Alana ever embraced
no, because Nynaeve would have
think
seen that.
Yeah, I don't know if Moradin had her shielded.
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah. I don't know if they cared at that point. I don't know if they considered Alana any kind of influence.
She was pretty... I thought she was a prisoner, and that's why, like, when he threw the knife at her, it just, like, hit her right away, because she was, like, bonded and she was in place.
Yeah, no, she was definitely bound. I don't know if she was sealed from the one power, though. Probably. She probably had a power shield on her or something.
Yeah.
Seems more efficient that way, but I just think it's really interesting because the Warder Aes Sedai bond as a whole, prior to when Alana does it to Rand, you never really see it bastardized in that way. And then it makes you think, like, why was it created so that it's so controlling for one person and not the other?
I mean, that's the way the Aes Sedai created it. They essentially created it to bond the men as their slaves initially, right? It was designed to have a man to help you that you could compel to do whatever the hell you wanted.
Before it became an honor to be an Aes Sedai's warder, it was a duty,
something that was thrust upon you.
It was a task, that was thrust upon them. And I'm sure most people, when the world was falling apart, weren't looking for the responsibility of protecting an Aes Sedai who was probably responsible for the breaking of the world, in their opinion anyways.
Well, and then by the end of the series, you see with Pavara and Andral that they do create a more equal by doing it both between each other.
Right. More symmetric bond.
And we also learned that the way that the bond is created now, bonding another person who can channel negates the ability to compel them.
Right. Yeah, the channeling ability provides some sort of protection from the compelling part of the bond.
Which they didn't know that before she did it to Rand.
No. She definitely tried to compel him right away. And most of the Aes Sedai don't even realize it until they bond the Black Tower. And then they're like, ooh, this doesn't work.
That always... What's his name? Is his name like Eben? The young boy.
Eben Hopwell.
That one always just stood out to me towards the end of Winter's Heart. Just his sacrifice was just... I didn't even really know who he was as a character. But when he did that, I was just like...
His death really, really, really ate up Daigyan as well, the white sister that was bonded to him.
Yeah, that was just a really shocking and kind of, in its own way, beautiful moment of showing how the Aes Sedai could become to actually treat the Black Tower more as equals.
Yeah, and the Andral-Pavara bond is always the nice one. That I always think, I always imagine a third united tower springing up, built from those who bond each other on opposite sex, and that one would be a more powerful tower than either the White or the Black Tower.
I liked Andral. I had mixed feelings when he started getting so much screen time at first, but...
Yeah, it's kind of tough to introduce a new character that late in the series who gets a lot of screen time, but it's, I think it was necessary for Brandon to have that outlet in the book.
And I think the part that grounded it for me was the fact that he incorporated Pavara so heavily. And since she was already an established character, it made it feel less random than if it had just been Andral.
And Andral had been around as a named character before. It wasn't like he hadn't been named.
Yeah.
He
didn't just create a guy.
Yeah. But it was one of those things where, he could have taken any one of the
named Ashaman
and turned them into that character, pretty much. Although I think what he wanted was one who was particularly weak, so... Sanderson loves to max min his characters, which is like put all of their abilities scores in one particular ability and then make them really shitty at everything else, but then exploit the fuck out of that one ability that they have, which is definitely what he did with Andral, which is
he gives a player one or two strengths and makes them play all of their moves off of their one or two strengths to negate their multiple weaknesses.
I was trying to think of an example in Stormlight, but pretty much the entire concept of the different Knights Radiant groups having like two specialties is kind of the entire... I mean, that's basically their entire thing.
Well, and like Waxmillion in Mistborn Era 2, where he just has one of each of one Mistborn power and one Ferrochemical ability, but they play off of each other in such a unique, interesting way that it becomes really, really powerful. Same sort of idea.
I have yet to read any other than Mistborn. I have not started that series at all.
Yeah, and you haven't either, Travis, have you?
I've only read the first trilogy.
Right. You haven't done Mistborn Era 2. I really liked Mistborn Era 2. Sometimes I almost think more than Mistborn Era 1.
I enjoyed Mistborn Era 1. I didn't enjoy it so much that I'm itching to be back in that universe.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, and in a lot of ways, Mistborn Era 2 really feels like a different world, because it literally is, right? Like, the end of Mistborn Era 1, spoilers, says it recreates the world, and we basically get Earth again. And technology advances to the point where this is sort of basically 1800s equivalent, where you've got, like, a Wild West, and but also, like, sort of a more civilized era.
Yeah.
So and then
basically different world.
It doesn't feel at all like the feudal system of government that the Lord Ruler and that world. It feels like 1,000 years have gone by.
Yeah, I haven't looked into any of the Mistborn stuff thus far. The first Sanderson books I read were the Reckoners trilogy, which my parents got me that for my birthday one year, and I believe I was really mad at them because I didn't want it at the time.
Fair enough.
I think I was in middle school and I was really petty about it, but then I really liked him, and then he finished The Wheel of Time, and I loved his 3 books in The Wheel of Time, so then I read Stormlight, and that's all of the Sanderson stuff I've read. Which was a really good like continuation after Wheel of Time. Like, I was afraid whatever I read next would just completely let me down, but I really enjoyed the Stormlight books so far.
Are you looking forward to Rhythm of War?
I am. That and the Dresden Files books were my 2 exciting books for the year.
Me too. I'm also very excited for the Dresden Files.
I liked the new one.
I think the new one was definitely a setup for the next one, though.
It was too much of just a half a book.
It was. Yeah, I mean, I'm can't judge it until the next book comes out, and I'm going to judge the 2 as a one whole book. There's
for
no
sure.
doubt about it.
Which I appreciate that they're coming out so quickly together. I mean, just because he split them in half. It's a shame you have to pay for both.
Yeah. He's given me enough enjoyment. I don't,
yeah.
The authors that I love, and I've read a lot of their books, I don't mind giving them a little extra money here and there.
Yeah, no.
So, to bring this back in, if I may.
On topic booked.
Rand asks Herid Fel, is there any reason you can think of to break the seals? And Herid Fel almost like immediately is like, what the fuck gave you that idea? Why? Only a madman.
It's a pretty intense question to ask somebody.
And yet it's also the most important question. It's the Matlock thing.
It
the
is.
Last and most important question, save for last.
But like, why did Rand ask that question?
I feel like you could take it in 2 ways. You could either say he asked it because he wants to just get it over with now, and he's considering doing it himself, which could ruin everything for all he knows. Or you could take it as him wanting to know what would happen if his enemies broke the seals, and trying to prepare for that.
Like, yeah, we see Lews Therin saying, break it, break it, break it, but I don't think that Lews Therin is chanting about breaking the seals until after this point. We haven't seen a lot of conversation with Rand about the seals on the Dark One's prison until now. And then after this, and after
I mean, he's literally
Herid-
saying break the seals, break the
Yeah.
seals. He's not saying break it, break it, break it.
Yeah,
Right.
he does reference them specifically.
But I think later, when Rand actually has the seals in his possession at one point, we see him chanting break it, break it, break it.
Yeah, that's when
it's the-
Taim hands him the seal. That was a little earlier.
Yeah, it's the same kind of principle, I guess. Was this earlier? Did Taim hand him a seal earlier?
Yeah, that's how he got into
met
his...
him.
Yeah, when he got recruited, when he showed up for the first time, Taim handed him the seal right away.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's probably where that question came from, just in general. I forgot about that detail.
Yeah,
Gotcha,
and then at
gotcha,
this
gotcha.
point, Lews
That makes
Theron
a lot more
is
sense.
pretty set on breaking the seals for madman reasons.
Yeah, that was the whole thing. Like, he raised it up over his head, and he was going to do it, and everyone was like... And he was like, no, I'm okay.
Yeah,
So-
yep, I remember that now.
There's
I don't
definitely
know why
some,
I didn't remember that was... I couldn't remember if that was, like, later or if that had already
No,
happened, I guess.
this is where it's tough if you're not actually on every episode to follow along exactly where we are in the continuity.
Yeah. Especially because I'm in, like, 3 different places on my reread. Like, I'm rereading along with you for when I jump on with a new episode, and then I'm also 2 chapters ahead, and then I'm also talking to somebody else that's just starting, so...
Oh yeah, that can make it confusing. Only thing I could get mixed up with is Obelisk Gate, and I find it hard to believe I'd managed to confuse that with this. I did want to say the "Let me die forever" line at the end of Rand's point of view is just a very intense moment, and I also thought it was an interesting relation to, even though the streams don't cross till the next book, it's pretty much Moradin's entire goal through the rest of the series is to
Right.
die forever. So I thought it's interesting that you're already seeing parallels between Rand's potential desires and what Moradin really wants. And it kind of establishes why Moradin would eventually try to join Rand or get Rand to join him instead of just outright opposing him.
Robert Jordan is a master of foreshadowing.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that just never would pick up.
Mm-hmm. No, and I really like what you said earlier, where there's a lot of parallels between Rand as the champion of the light and Moradin as the champion of the dark, and this is one of them. They both kind of want to die forever.
Yeah, they're kind of opposites who are also the same. They
Right.
are on opposite sides, but somewhat want the same things and have similar characteristics.
Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite things about Matt's realization in the last battle is that Moradin's not his enemy, the Dark One is. And he's just like, yeah, go away, Moradin. Shoot. Like, you really are
Yeah.
just not that important in all of this.
That's honestly one of my favorite developments in the series, I think, was Ishmael returning as Moradin, because I did not care about Ishmael, but Moradin became one of my favorite villains and also kind of just favorite characters throughout the rest of the books. Just thought he was a really interesting point of view compared to...
Until he was reborn as Moradin, he just kind of seemed, like, unhinged and chaotic.
Yeah, he was just flat out crazy.
Yeah, whereas, like, after his rebirth, he seemed to be more directed. Like, same chaos, much more directed to a singular vision.
I think that has a lot to do with the true power and how long he'd been using the true power. And I believe that, the saw, which eventually turned into the flames in his eyes and mouth, had driven him basically insane. And by basically giving him a new body, that process was reset.
When he dies, do you think that he completely reset, or do you think he just loses some of the saw effect in his eyes? Because he still has it intensely when he returns.
Yeah, but I think that's because he starts using the true power almost immediately.
Yeah, just wasn't sure if
because-
you were thinking he lost all of it or not.
Yeah, we see that he channels almost exclusively.
Yeah, I think he channels... I don't think it's almost exclusively. I think he channels exclusively true power. I think that his use of the true power has burnt his ability away to use the one power.
Oh, really?
You don't think he can use the one power?
I don't think he can, to be perfectly honest. I think he can sense it, but we never, ever, ever see him embrace the one power.
I don't know if it's so much burnt it out of him as much as, like, the true power is just more powerful and it serves his ends better and it's so much more appealing. And he has the biggest share of it of any of the Forsaken. So I think he just chooses to use it exclusively. I don't know that he can't use the one power as much as just won't. Because why? It doesn't do what he wants it to do.
Yeah, I would say that the idea of using the one power is kind of more burned out of him than the actual ability. Though I think if we could actually see that the ability was burned out of him, that would be a really interesting point for his character. If there's anywhere that can be, like, mentioned.
I kind of see that as the price. The Forsaken always talk about paying a price for using the one power and using too much of it, and that's something they don't want to pay. And I've always thought about, well, what is that price, And for me, the thought was you literally burn out the ability to use the one power from you by using too much of the true power.
Gotcha. See, my idea of that price was just the madness that comes with it.
Yeah, there's that too.
And the effect that it has on the world around you. The fact that every time you use the true power, you're like shredding the fabric of reality around you.
Right. Although I don't think the Forsaken really care about that much.
Some of them do. I mean,
they do want to have a world to control when they become nameless. They don't realize that the Dark One is probably just going to crush and destroy existence, period, end of conversation.
And the ones who are especially cowards, like Mogideon and Asmodean in his own ways, I mean, they definitely would not want to risk that.
Asmodean in his own ways. No, Asmodean was a fucking coward. He's still one of my favorite Forsaken, but he was probably second to like Mogideon, he was probably the most cowardly.
Yeah, I was trying to think of somebody besides Asmodean who is up there on cowardice levels who isn't Mogideon, and I couldn't think of one. I mean, all of them have some cowardice in them, but that was pretty much all I had. I just wanted to mention the last line of the Rand point of view.
So Egwene walks in. She is just stomping down the halls, being pissed at everybody and thinking to herself.
Mm-hmm. Because she can't get into the world of dreams legally.
Why is she so angry? That's one. Actually, I'm not sure what has her at such a high level of pissed offness that maidens are like, ooh, I'm staying away from her. Like, that's a level of pissed offness that we rarely ever see from Egwene.
She's bitter about still not being able to access the world of dreams freely, like having to sneak around to do it. I think she's also bitter at not being included amongst the wise ones. There's a little excerpt coming up in here where like she tried to follow Amis into a meeting, and Amis like turned around and bit her head off and was like, "You were not invited."
Yeah, she's not pleased by the fact that she can't listen in on their conversation, especially with Avienda, who is in there.
Yeah. Especially because like one of her friends is in there, and she kind of wants to know what's going on with that, and it's a link to Rand, and yeah, there's just a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, I think the first note I had about this point of view was that one of my favorite things about Egwene at this point in the series is her loyalty to Avienda as a friend, and like you see it when she first realizes that she's in with Amis, that she's concerned about what's going to happen with Avienda and that she can't be there to support her, and also because she wants to be included. And I just really enjoyed their relationship for a while, and I always thought it was a shame that once she gets with Elaine, you really don't see them have a relationship anymore. Yeah, that's kind of odd.
They were really good friends, and like they were apprentices together for a cool minute in the Waste and even here in Cairhien, and then their relationship just kind of like comes to a screeching halt almost out of nowhere. Like Egwene gets sent off to become Amerlin, and Avienda gets sent off to go traipsing around with Elaine.
I can't even remember them like interacting beyond that point. I assume they talk a few more times, but I can't think of a specific example where you actually see them interact as friends again.
Yeah, it really does seem that Avienda substitutes Elaine for Egwene. And like she's proud of her, but she doesn't seem to really consider her much of a friend anymore.
No, and I think maybe part of that has to do with the fact that Egwene and Rand kind of become antagonistic, and Avienda is always going to side with the man that she loves and the person who's helping to lead the Aiel forward and saving a remnant of their society. She's always going to side with Rand over Egwene, and with the antagonism between them, makes it harder to have a working relationship.
So that's a really good point.
Yeah, it also makes sense that Avienda would shift her focus to Elaine, especially because the sharing Rand thing.
Yeah, and don't forget, Elaine was always her first sister first.
Yeah, she knew in the stone? Is that when they...
Yeah, they became good friends, and Elaine asked, and Elaine said, watch over Rand for me. And that's that's why she's coming back here to basically offer her throat to Elaine. So they got really close back then. So in a lot of ways, this is renewing an old friendship. And
yeah.
Egwene may have been someone who she was close with and someone she trained with, but, in a lot of ways, Elaine has always been her BFF.
Yeah, I forget that they were friends in the Stone of Tyr.
I feel like it's kind of like how Rand and Elaine's relationship kind of takes a background approach, because they don't really interact that much beyond when they're in the Stone of Tyr. And the same for Avienda and Elaine until coming up when they're together for a long, long time. So you don't really think about the fact that they are so close because we didn't really see most of that time.
Elaine must have been a real charmer.
She must have been. I mean, they all just really attached themselves to her in that stone. I mean, I get it, like, you know, Rand was probably really easy to make susceptible since they were making out all the time. Avienda can't say the same, unless she can, but we never know.
I like this quote. Whatever the mysterious rules governing wise ones, when Cerelia was around, leadership always settled on her. Egwene thought it was pure strength of will. And I like how that sort of foreshadows how you become a wise one. You just...
It also kind of hits the nail on the head, because, like...
That is what gives her the authority, yeah.
Right. It's not necessarily willpower so much as, like, wisdom and the willpower to exert it.
Yeah, it's definitely what that implies. And I definitely did not consider the allusion to the future of when Avienda has to learn that it's just willpower and asserting that she is a wise one. That's a good point that you brought up. I've always just really loved Sorelia, and the fact that the tower would ever, like, they always say that the White Tower would have rejected her out of hand. It's just so ridiculous, and it's one of the reasons I've just always been frustrated by the White Tower so many times.
Yeah, for them, one power is more important.
Their viewpoint is, it's so narrow, like, sighted. They only care about the level of power people have, whereas she's, like, such a good wise one and just a leader, and it's just a shame that they would dismiss her out of hand when the Aiel used her to such good effect.
Yeah. And it's a big shortcoming of the Aes Sedai that they put so much stock in an individual's strength in the one power rather than their wisdom or their strength of character or their strength of leadership. Like Swan's a perfect example of that. Like, Swan was a brilliant leader in her own way, but because she was so strong, they gave her more credit than she was due, and they let her get away with more than she should have been able to get away with, and it led to her own collapse and a lot of cracks in the unity of the White Tower. And then when she's reduced by like 2/3, they completely dismiss her, and so many people seem to forget just how crafty and clever and capable she actually is. It's a huge shortcoming of the Aes Sedai.
Yeah, it's always been really borderline ridiculous how much they just don't think her and Leanne can do anything once they've been stilled. And even once they regain the power, they're super weak, they still think they're just like not able to achieve anything. And they achieve so much with what they actually have, and it's just a shame. The White Tower really needs to learn to value people beyond just one trait.
Ironically, Cadsuane knows it. Cadsuane knows how dumb it is. She exploits it, but she knows how dumb it is. Like, because she uses Daigyon a lot. And she uses the fact that Daigyon is the weakest Aes Sedai in the White Tower to make Daigyon her eyes and ears amongst other sisters, and to have Daigyon drop, like, subtle hints. Like, Cadsuane uses Daigyon a lot, knowing that Daigyon can do things in ways that a stronger sister can't and be more effective.
Yeah, Cadsuane, for all of her own flaws in how she treats some people, she has a more, maybe just from her world experience and the fact that she's been away from the tower for so long, she's less set on the tower laws and rules and is able to accomplish more because of her separation from that.
Yeah, and we see that universally amongst the Aes Sedai. The most effective and the most influential Aes Sedai happen to be the ones that bend the rules or break tradition.
And are trained outside the tower.
Yeah, who aren't so married to White Tower custom.
Sorelia, thank you, we were just talking about, notices that Egwene is slightly distracted by a boy.
Yeah.
And they think it's someone she's seeing in real worlds. They're like, is it one of the Aiel boys? But it's like, nope, it's Gawain.
Yeah, and she says that those hips are made for babies and you will have them, but she's wrong about that, and I can't imagine her and Gawain being parents. Maybe it's because neither of them are my personal favorite people, and their relationship is just kind of dysfunctional in general.
Gawain was supposed to be the cool brother, and he was just such a disaster, and he was literally Egwene's worst decision.
Okay, I personally ended up liking Gawain more than I like Egwene.
All right, I'll get the cage match going.
I was gonna, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Egwene is literally my favorite character in the entire series. Like, I like her more than Rand. I like her more than Perrin. I like her more than Matt. God, I like her miles more than Matt.
Which is fair.
Matt's probably one of my least favorite characters in the entire series.
That's fair. I mean, I like Matt, but there's definitely a few I put over Matt.
The problem, and I will admit with Egwene, is that she doesn't outgrow her like petulant entitlement until well after becoming the Amerlin, when she realizes that she has to fight for that influence and it's not going to be handed to her.
I agree with that, and I think that's why I didn't like her for a long time. And then I love her arc of retaking the tower. It's one of my favorite parts of that part of the series. It's phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
I think for me, Egwene is one of the only characters in the final 3 Sanderson books who I liked less than I liked before them. I did not like, as she slowly became more the Amerlin in control of the tower, her dismissal of everything Rand and all of the rest of her friends told her really annoyed me. And it was an interesting way to pit her and Rand against each other when it was going to the Dragon's Peace meeting, because their tension is kind of what drives the whole thing. But because she put herself against Rand, Nynaeve, and every single person she's ever cared about, it made it hard for me to see why she could think that all of the people she's ever cared for were wrong.
Yeah, and Egwene definitely has a certain amount of arrogance that can't really be excused. And it's hard for me to, like, hate her entire character because of one single stance that she took.
Yeah, and I like her character.
Even a couple of stances that she took, because the rest of her character, her drive, her ambition, her absolute, like, raw capability and potential and progressive ideas are just so spectacular compared to so many of the other Aes Sedai that, like, I can't help but love her for being that progressive voice and that willful force of change and evolution. She makes mistakes. I don't love any of our leaders 100%. We could get into, like, real life politics, and I could bring up, like, Alexandria Cortez or Bernie Sanders or whatever. And, like,
I know that one.
I like them. I respect them very much as leaders and the things that they're trying to do, but I don't think that they're perfect. And that's how I feel about Egwene, is she'd be my candidate, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't critique her when she deserves it.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of points that Egwene makes that I really liked in her leadership, and as a whole, I was surprised by how much I, like, by the end, agreed with her being Amerlin as a smart choice. I don't know if I would have thought she could have made it as good of Amerlin after the last battle, but she was pretty spot on for what they needed for that event. But I also kind of thought personally that although she had some progressive ideals, she constantly says throughout maybe this part of the series and going forward, she wants to induct the Wise Ones and all of the other groups into the Aes Sedai.
Not so much into the Aes Sedai. She never intends to make them Aes Sedai, but she does intend to tie everybody to the tower.
She does, and that, I just think, I did not like the White Tower's views most of the time. And so the fact that she was so determined to tie them to the tower, even though they've been doing well on their own, I think that rubbed me the wrong way half the time with Egwene.
She appreciated the influence that she got from the Aiel Wise Ones and how much stronger of an Aes Sedai that made her, and she wanted more sisters in the future to have that. And she saw
it's more about changing the tower than it is about changing the other groups. It's more about bringing the open ideas that the other groups have, the ability with weather the sea folk have, the ability with healing the kin have,
and the ability with leadership that the Wise Ones have.
Right. And just bringing all of those concepts and ideas into the tower to strengthen it. And of course, obviously they want, she wants to tie them in a way that, like, making deals and treaties and
allowing them
trade.
All to maintain a certain level of autonomy while still being interwoven.
And that is kind of one of the most unique things about Egwene, especially at this point, is that with her Wise One training and Aes Sedai training, she definitely has evolved into a perspective that neither of the two groups alone has had. So I definitely agree, like, her goal of pushing them all together, I agreed with. I just personally didn't like how she described and wanted to get it done. It was just something, as I was reading her point of view, that kind of irked me.
And I think that point of view of hers does evolve, especially after sitting down with all of them in the same room. She kind of realizes that there's no way that she's going to get these 3.5 groups of people and a half with the Ken, because the Ken aren't really a source so much as the Wise Ones and the Windfinders. But getting these 3 powerful groups of channelers together, she's like, there's no way in hell that any of us are going to be the superior. Like, it is going to be a coming together of equals. And I think that realization dawns on her. And that's when she's like, I want us to be able to exchange our influence and exchange our wisdoms and use that to make all of ourselves stronger. Primarily, her allegiance is to the White Tower. And she definitely wanted to strengthen the White Tower. But if she could strengthen the White Tower while not hurting other people and also helping them, she was game for it. And I loved that about her.
I really love her political stuff. I mean, she is so good with the politics. I mean, that is, it's rare that you can enjoy the politics of fantasy books. Most of the time, it is really just the most boring part. And I'm trying to scope over it. And yet, I think Sanderson did a good job of writing Egwene's politics the same way that Jordan wrote Rand's politics in the early books. Like, they're just interesting enough to really sort of capture you and be like, oh, that was really clever of him. Oh, that was really clever of her. That's how they're manipulating the people around them. Like, yeah. Like, it's very much a mirror of Rand's early political manipulations.
And we get to see that a little bit. We get to see Robert Jordan writing Egwene's manipulations of the Aes Sedai a lot as well, when he, like, pushes her into the declaration of war against Elida.
Right. That is Book 11, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Book 11. That is
the last Jordan book.
Jordan had a very deft hand at writing politics and making it interesting. It's normally when I'm reading a fantasy book, it's the magic and it's the action that really keeps me going. With the Wheel of Time, I come back to it every single time because I miss the political intrigue and the political interactions between the different factions.
Yeah, for the most part, I never had an issue with the politics. There were like parts in the series that definitely slowed down for me, but most of the time it was not the political stuff. It was pretty much just the Bowl of Winds.
Oh, the sea folk are so unbearable.
That's just my least favorite part of the whole series. It's just the Bowl of Winds.
Well, sea folk on land are unbearable. I'll put it that way. I like the sea folk in their ships, but when they're like, this is the sort of thing where, like, pushing these 3 groups of women into a very small space away from their comfort zones and making them do shit, like, it's really annoying. But at the same time, it's like the women stuck in the circus together, where it's like, yeah, you're going to get on each other's nerves in those circumstances. And the fact that he writes that so well, I like. The fact that it's not the most fun thing in the world to read is still holds true, even though it's very well written.
Circus chapters are so good.
The circus chapters are really good. And one of the things that makes me love The Wheel of Time so much and love Robert Jordan's writing style is that in all of those moments, whatever you're feeling while reading those things is exactly what his characters are feeling.
Right.
Like, when the girls are all irritated with each other when they're running away in the circus, we feel that irritation.
When Rand's confused because he's been hit by lightning and lost on the road and he's timeline's all messed up, we're confused about the timeline.
When Perrin is, like, so anxious to see things happen and is, like, bored out of his mind and pissed off that there's nothing productive going on, we call it the slog.
Though Perrin at that point was pretty excited to see Fael again, and I assume from what I've seen online that a lot of people didn't share that excitement.
We were excited to see the end of that campaign.
I liked that arc. I don't know. I enjoyed that part. I guess, I don't know. I like Fael.
I didn't hate it either. It wasn't my favorite part.
I actually liked Fael and Perrin more separate than when they got back together.
That's a decent point, yeah. No, although, like I said, I've always been a Perrin guy. I like his campaign. I like what he does. I like his motivations.
It's an interesting plot line.
Perrin is bae.
Yeah. So let's talk about the chapter a little more.
Yeah,
we could do that. I guess that's why we're actually here.
Just why we're here. I mean, I love the conversation about Egwene. I figured we'd go off on that little tangent. And this is a pretty low event POV.
You get to see development of her personality rather than any actual events.
Right.
Yeah, and her relation to Rand kind of evolves.
Yeah, you get to see some of her personal growth with these kinds of chapters with Egwene, because, like, she's still learning who she is outside of, the wise ones, or the wisdom apprentice and the accepted. Like, she's kind of coming into her own here a little bit, but she doesn't really have a solid direction. She's pretending to be something that she isn't, and It's not until around this part of the series that you really start to see Egwene begin to outgrow the spoiled innkeeper's daughter.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is also when she really starts picking up on Gawain. That just came out of nowhere when I read it. I just didn't, like, of all the romances, I had no basis for expecting it. And then Gawain just suddenly appeared. What a guy.
There was a scene a couple books back where Elaine points out to Egwene that Gawain is besotted with her.
Yeah.
And then suddenly Egwene becomes aware of that.
Just felt so, I don't know, ingenuine to me the first time I read it. I was just like, where did this come from? Even though I ended up liking Gawain. I think his final 3 books, he has a really interesting character arc. But
oh God, he's such a disaster.
Gawain's arc is it's not one of my favorites in the final 3 books. That's saying too much, but I thought it was really good. I really liked the progression Sanderson gave him.
He doubled down on everything. He never really grew. He just became more and more and more and more and more of exactly what was wrong with him, in my opinion. I
don't know. I really enjoyed his arc in the final 3. And I found that Gawain by the end was interesting because he's the least traditional protagonist I've read in a fantasy book. He is everything that a fantasy protagonist, like, in theory should be, but he does it all wrong. And I thought that made him an interesting viewpoint because traditionally in a story, he would, like, do everything well, but he just sucks constantly.
It's exactly, yeah. And I won't say that Gawain's not interesting. His arc is crazy interesting. It's just also crazy frustrating, and I have no love for him.
Yeah, he still easily ranks as one of my least favorites. But...
Right. No, and that's something to really be important to point out is, like, I can really fucking hate a character, Elida, and still really enjoy the arcs that are written. You know, I can really fucking hate Gawain for his actions and still be like, yeah, that's a very realistic character who made really dumb choices. Like,
yeah.
I mean, there are really flawed people out there.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. In fact, most of the heroes that we love so much in our books tend to be a little too good. I mean, look at Egwene. Like, Egwene has a lot of things kind of handed to her. She doesn't have to fight as hard for some things as even some of our other main characters do.
So, one of the things that she does here, which has implications in the future, is she resists Rand's Taviran nature when he tries to pull on her to tell her where Saladar is. And that's actually really important in the last battle, where he tries to get her to, like, sign the Dragon Treaty, and she resists.
Mm-hmm.
And that breaks the whole thing, and actually gives Avienda a chance to make a change.
Does Rand try to do it on purpose here? Or is it more of an unintended, like, he's thinking it and it happens?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, when he needs something desperately, he, like, that, like, Taviran need really does change the world around him. And I'm not sure how conscious he is of it in the beginning. He certainly becomes more conscious of it over time.
Yeah, because by the end he does it purposefully.
Here, I think it's entirely on accident. He's just saying, I need her, Egwene. I need Elaine to put her on the throne. Like, both politically and for his own personal, emotional stability. And so that need is coming through so hard and so strong that the Taviran-ness is, like, kicking up a notch.
Yeah, I'm nodding very hard.
And then she grabs Saidar, and that protects her from some of the... And we've seen that before, that holding the power helps protect you from some of the influence of Taviran. Because it makes you more connected to the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he sees that as a threat, which we get in his POV, where he's like, ugh, I was just trying to talk to her, and she grabs her, gun. She clutches her pearls. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
She was just trying to ground herself and, like, take root in something.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw it as her getting ready to defend herself.
Which is pretty easy for me to see both sides of their point of view on it, because for her, he's kind of terrifying, and grounding herself makes sense. And then for him, after having been abused by so many people in recent, I guess, days, weeks, whatever the timeline is, it is hard for him to trust even somebody that he has grown up with. And he sees her do this and realizes that she's kind of becoming the thing that he no longer trusts at all, even if he wants to have anything else on this Egwene section. I mean, I really liked her interaction with Rand.
What did you say?
I just said I really liked her interaction with Rand. I thought it was really enlightening on both of their parts.
This saying between the two of them is one that stuck with me forever, which is a cat for a hat and a hat for a cat, but nothing for nothing. And I've always thought about that, especially at work when I'm like, someone asked me to do me a favor, and I'm like,
Have you said that to them?
I've definitely thought it, and I've been like, as I'm walking away, I'm like, a cat for a hat. And they're like, what? I'm like, nothing.
I'm just trying to picture, like, what somebody's reaction would be if you just said that to them. They'd be so confused. They'd be like, what are you talking about Dr. Seuss for?
Exactly. Yeah, it's very Dr. Seussy, isn't it?
Yeah, it always did feel very Dr. Seussy to me, which is kind of why I didn't love it. But I do also like the whole... It begins to frame their relationship, that the relationship between Rand and Egwene has become less friendly and more transactional.
Yeah, which is really disappointing in some ways.
Very disappointing.
Because their relationship in the early books is very, not innocent, but kind of wholesome.
And for me, it calls back a little bit to a bird can't teach a fish to fly, and a fish can't teach a bird to swim. Like, you got a cat and a hat, and a hat and a cat. And I mean, it's not exactly the same, but this sort of dichotomy between these two sides that become very, like you said, transactional. I like that term for how the relationship ends up.
Yeah, that's a really accurate description. Is that other phrase you said, is that in the series? I don't remember that.
Which one?
The fish thing.
The bird teaching a fish to fly and the fish teaching the bird to swim. Moraine, I think the first time we see it is with Moraine when she's talking about Rand learning to channel. A woman can't teach a man to channel any more than a bird can teach a fish to fly.
Gotcha. It's an interesting comparison.
It's Moraine for you.
That kind of wraps up that section with Egwene.
I didn't really have much more. It's funny. It's a conversation with Rand, but it's a lot of just internal monologue and stuff like that. Just her growth as a
not
as a person.
Ton of dialogue.
No.
Then we go back to Rand's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really short, but I really liked the line of, it was saddening, where he's talking about her becoming Aes Sedai. I feel like he said that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was saddening is at the end of the first paragraph of his point of view.
He just had to become used to thinking of Egwene as one of them. Which
is a disappointing outlook, because track back even just a single book, and he was starting to really care about Moraine as an Aes Sedai, even though they didn't always trust her. And now at this point, even just associating generally with Aes Sedai makes him sad, because he can no longer ever listen to a thing they say.
And with Alana just betraying his trust, a couple of days ago, like, he is still extremely wary of Aes Sedai.
I like this whole paragraph at the beginning of this POV switch. Like, it's just a big moment for Rand realizing that so much of his old life is just gone. The people that he knew are no longer the people that they were in the Two Rivers, and everything about his life has kind of shifted, except at their cores. Like, Egwene is still Egwene. She's always done everything that she's ever done with her whole heart. He's sad that is now pulling her away from him, because he misses his friends and the simplicity of his life before, but he still loves her because of who she is and the fact that she's so ambitious and so driven and so dedicated to everything that she does.
In a lot of ways, he's kind of going through what Rand and... not Rand, he is Rand. What Matt and Perrin and all of them went through in, like, book 2 and 3 when they realized that he was the Dragon Reborn. And even though he was still Rand, they had to realize that he's also now in this role that they can't understand and affects everybody. Whereas now he's having to realize the same thing about Egwene and the others, is that even though they're at their heart the same person, the roles they've entered into have changed the dynamics. And before, he was the one changing, whereas now everybody else around him is changing to meet where he has to be in some ways.
And then we just get a little POV from Sulin at the end, where you sort of see that the maidens aren't abiding by his only 2 at a time rule. They're like hiding all the way around him in all sorts of like rings and hiding the fact that they're following him around in order to protect him.
And she's just like, she loves him as like this weird mix of like a brother and a son.
I didn't realize how old Sulin was the first time I read through, or the first time I met her. Because she's one of the older maidens, right? Or not old, but... Or does she just...
When was she born? She's not old, but she's definitely older.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to imagine that people that spend their lives fighting each other don't
survive that long.
Great life expectancy.
No.
And her skin's leathered, but she spends all of her time outside.
Yeah.
And her hair is white.
Yeah.
But we see that there are other maidens that have... Yeah, her hair is white. which is why she always looks old, because
Yeah.
she has white hair. But we see that there's other Aiel that have the white hair that aren't necessarily, like Amis also has white hair, and she's not that old.
Yep, we don't get an age for her. We don't have a year of birth for Sulin.
All right. When I thought of this book, when you first started doing Lord of Chaos for the podcast, one of the moments that immediately popped to mind was the moment of Sulin, I believe, when they take Rand and she freaks out because they've taken her, like, I think she calls him first brother or something.
She does.
And that moment just was immediately one of my, like, things that stood out as one of my favorite individual sections of the book. And Sulin as a whole is just one of the most, even though she's kind of a tertiary character, she just has such a nice little impact on his life and the dynamic with the maidens.
Yeah, and she's also gets that sort of unique arc where because she orders the maidens around in an emergency, she takes up the servant's livery for a while, and that sort of gives her a bunch of, like, sort of comedic character rounding events. She's sort of one of the more three-dimensional maidens that we get to meet.
Speaking of three-dimensional maidens, I didn't even know Aviendha had a sister. So I guess not three-dimensional. They mentioned Niala.
No, she only doesn't get brought up much, but she's just Gaishain.
Yeah, it said her sister, and I was like, wait, I have to Google this. And she's only mentioned in like 2 chapters in the entire series. I think this is her last actual appearance.
And I think that that's very telling of the way that Aiel culture is. Like, blood is important, but it's by no means the biggest thing. Like, society before, like, clan before anything, and then society. They live a very, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb lifestyle.
And, one thing that never comes out is we never have Juandin's family ever come forward and claim Rand.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, Janduin, his father, yeah. I wonder if he had much family. I mean, remember, Aiel don't necessarily have long life expectancies.
Right.
We never even hear about who his, like, any relatives at all, do we?
Grandfathers or brothers or uncles or anything. Yeah, we don't hear anything about it.
Nothing like that.
That'd be interesting if you somehow did manage to discover that. Maybe Rand could go visit them after the end of the last battle, if they exist.
If they exist. He's in a new body now. I don't think he ever really will reveal his old identity. I don't think anybody except the 3 girls will ever know that he's the same person.
I think his father.
And Cadsuane. Oh yeah, maybe Tam.
I like to imagine that he'll someday tell at least Matt, Perrin, and Nynaeve. I mean, Nynaeve already kind of like got a hint of something by the end. She knew that the girls were acting weird. There's no way Nynaeve wouldn't figure it out.
Nynaeve will figure it out.
Even if she doesn't talk to him, Nynaeve would eventually know.
And, I would love to see Rand and Moraine sitting in a fireplace and Tom just having a nice conversation.
Yeah, I think that his circle of, like, main people will know, but, like, the rest of the world, anybody that's not already deserving of a spot close to him will never know.
Yeah, no, because he doesn't want the spotlight at all anymore.
Ever, yeah. Like, the 3 girls that are bonded to him, Cadsuane, Nynaeve, Moraine, Tom, Tam, and, like, Matt and Perrin.
Yeah.
Loyal.
Oh, yeah, Loyal, because Loyal writes the book.
Right. I forgot about Loyal pretty much entirely. He kind of sits out for a while.
You're just not that loyal to him. Well, he's hanging out with Perrin right now, so he and Perrin's missing in action on his honeymoon for this book.
I will say, I appreciate the recent influx of puns that you've been trying to make. It's a fun addition. The more puns, the better, in my opinion.
I'm just a punny guy, and I usually suppress that for recordings, but it's, you do it long enough, it starts to come out.
Seth makes me roll my eyes with dad jokes quite often.
Oh, yeah.
Amanda wants her dog back, Seth.
Okay, well, it's a good time to call it quits.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But yeah, Alex, thank you so much for joining me. That was awesome. It was a real pleasure to have you on. And Travis, as always.
Yeah, I had a good time. If anybody wants to look up my book, it's on Amazon.
Yes, please go look it up. It's wonderful.
The Stranger's Orphan. I get like 50 cents. Woohoo.
Hey, you know what adds up. It adds up. All right, well, I gotta run. Thanks so much to everybody. And we'll see you on Tuesday.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?